You're listening to the free ad-sponsored re-release of American Elections Wicked Game, a weekly march through every presidential election from 1789 to 2024. To listen to all episodes right now, ad-free, go to intohistory.com. Subscribers there enjoy ad-free listening, early access, bonus content, and more from a growing collection of great history podcasts. Start your free trial today at intohistory.com. Two Americans, William Gaylord and Paul Chaperone, sit in a cell in Iran's infamous Qasr prison. They've been locked away for 46 days. Originally constructed in 1790 as a palace, Qasr prison was rebuilt and repurposed in the late 1920s. For 50 years, it has stood as an impenetrable fortress used by the Pahlavi Shahs who've ruled Iran for most of the 20th century to house political prisoners. Gaylord and Chaperone have no connection to the United States government or politics, but they're being used as bargaining chips in a feud between Iran and the business they work for, EDS, Electronic Data Systems, a Texas-based information technology company. Something's going on outside, Bill. Something's always going on outside. Can you make out what they're yelling? I don't know, Death to the Shah, or another one of their greatest hits? No, this seems different. As the two Americans sit in their prison cell, the streets outside fill with Iranian revolutionaries. The Shah has fled, and his pro-Western, secular Iranian government is crumbling. The Ayatollah Khamenei has returned to Iran after 15 years in exile to install his conservative, theocratic regime. Followers of the Ayatollah have spent the last several nights marching on police stations, jails, and government agencies they believe to still be loyal to the deposed Shah. No, listen, someone's firing shots. Well, you think it's the guards or the mob? Well, which one's worse? The two men fall silent as the chanting outside grows louder. More gunshots ring out, followed by screams from the crowd. The mob outside rushes the gates of the prison. Oh, you're right, Paul, this is different. They come to kill us or break us out? Within minutes, the answer is clear. The mob floods the prison, and cell doors across Qasr suddenly open. If we're going, Paul, we need to go now. Where? We'll figure that out later. Just let's go. Gaylord and Chaperone step out of their cell and join the line of 11,000 prisoners exiting Qasr. They make their way past prison guards who have laid down their weapons and step out into the streets of Tehran. The scene outside is loud and chaotic. Two Americans find themselves in the middle of a growing mob of people. A man breaks from the group and manages to signal them.
Bill! Paul!
Reza? What are you doing here? Come on, we gotta go. Reza Salah is an Iranian employee of EDS. He leads his American colleagues from the prison to the Hyatt Hotel 2 miles away. When they arrive, they're met by a small group of commandos led by a retired Army Special Forces officer, Colonel Arthur Bull Simmons, who greets the two freed prisoners. It's good to see you two. Don't worry, gentlemen. We'll have you out of here in no time. Where are we going? Across Iran and into Turkey. What the hell's going on? Ross Perot is bringing you home. From Airship, I'm Lindsey Graham, and this is American Elections Wicked Game. When William Gaylord and Paul Chaperone safely returned to America in February of 1979, EDS founder and eccentric Texas businessman Ross Perot went directly to the press with his story. In interviews, Perot painted a picture of a feckless United States government unwilling to help two of his employees, who he claimed were being held hostage by the Iranian government. He regaled reporters with tales of how he had clandestinely flown into Iran, gone undercover, and helped his old friend Colonel Simmons develop the perfect rescue plan. Perot suggested Iranian EDS employees like Reza Salah were the ones who convinced the crowd of Iranian revolutionaries to raid Qasr prison. These EDS heroes then led their American colleagues through dangerous Iranian checkpoints and barely evaded arrest on more than one occasion. 2 years later, in 1981, Ross Perot tracked down Ken Follett, a well-known Welsh author of thrillers and historical fiction. Follett accepted Perot's offer to turn the story of the rescue from Kazar prison into a book. In 1983, On the Wings of Eagles became an international bestseller. In 1986, it was turned into an NBC miniseries starring Burt Lancaster. Perot's self-promotion coupled with the success of On the Wings of Eagles allowed his version of events to overshadow any other. But a very different narrative came from the U.S. State Department and from reporters who were unwilling to take Perot at his word. They suggested Perot and his people had nothing to do with the raid on Kazar prison, but that Colonel Simmons and his men simply benefited from an already volatile situation on the ground in Tehran. They also claimed that their subsequent journey from Iran to Turkey was entirely uneventful. Regardless of the truth, Ross Perot's identity as a man of action had been solidified. Many Americans saw Perot as a man who would get things done, unlike the government. Throughout the 1980s, Perot gained more national fame and built on his already substantial fortune. At 5 foot 5 inches, with large ears, a distinct speaking style, and a unique Texarkana dialect, Ross Perot cut a memorable figure, especially on television. By late 1990, Perot became a mainstay on the 24-hour news networks. Only he no longer focused his interviews on his exploits in Iran or his business ventures. He talked about the flagging U.S. economy and the domestic policy failures of Republican President George H.W. Bush. Perot even started to float the idea that he might challenge Bush in the 1992 election. At that point, President Bush hardly paid attention to the Texas businessman. Bush had been enjoying an upswing in popularity since the initial fall of the Berlin Wall in November of 1989. And while the wall wouldn't completely come down until 1991, President Bush was already being heralded as the man who had fulfilled Ronald Reagan's promise of overcoming the Soviet threat and ending the Cold War. So as the 1992 campaign season approached, and as George H.W. Bush celebrated his success on the international stage, his re-election seemed all but certain. There was one major issue, though. The U.S. economy was sagging. This left open the door for two challengers. Texas businessman Ross Perot would whip up popular support among the American middle class, and a little-known Democratic governor from Arkansas would make the case that it was finally time for a new generation to lead the country. Before long, President Bush would find himself fighting for his political life and fending off attacks from both the left and the right. This is episode 52, 1992, Bush versus Clinton versus Perot, the baby boomer and the independent. It's February 21st, 1991 in the White House residence. President George H.W. Bush sits with a member of the National Security Council, Condoleezza Rice. Bush and Rice wait on a call from President Mikhail Gorbachev of the USSR. Bush is anxious. If the Soviets did their job, Condoleezza, we should see a swift end to the fighting over there. Yes, Mr. President. The United States and coalition forces have been at war with Iraq since August of 1990, following an Iraqi invasion of its oil-rich Persian Gulf neighbor, the sovereign nation of Kuwait. The U.S. is on the brink of victory, but Bush wants confirmation that Iraqi President Saddam Hussein will accept the United States' terms for ending the conflict. The Soviets have served as intermediaries between America and Iraq throughout the process. Hello, Mikhail, how are you?
Good morning. It's morning here.
Oh, I know that, Mikhail. Why are you working so late?
I am always working.
Bush and Gorbachev work well together, and they have for decades. Following the opening of the Berlin Wall, the two men worked together closely to help unify Germany. And today, Mikhail is helping Bush bring about an end to the war. Mikhail took Bush's terms to Saddam Hussein, unconditional withdrawal of Iraqi troops from Kuwait and an immediate exchange of prisoners of war. But Saddam is pushing back.
George, I've spent 3 hours talking to the Iraqis. They are suggesting that the release of prisoners would come after the withdrawal, which they are now saying could take about 6 weeks.
Well, very candidly, we have no trust anymore in anything Saddam says. We are convinced he's beating these prisoners. There has to be an immediate release. And I very much appreciate the effort you are trying to make on the time of withdrawal, but he got a hell of a lot of troops into Kuwait in just 48 hours, so they can do a lot better than 6 weeks. Mikhail, we're willing to work with him on some points, but the idea that he can somehow get a victory out of a crushing defeat would be unacceptable.
George, I understand that we are discussing an issue of great importance, and that is why I'm thinking about your arguments in the most careful way. We will make your terms clear.
Mikhail, I want to reassure you once more that we appreciate what you are doing, and that we are determined to continue to work with the Soviet Union when this is over.
I'm sure no winds and no storms can put us off the course we've made towards cooperation. I will be in touch.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. 1 week after the phone call, with the help of the Soviets, the Gulf War came to an end. Desert Storm, as it had come to be known, would be viewed as one of the most decisive and efficient military victories in American history. The televised display of American military power, Bush's ability to bring together a coalition force of multiple nations, and his willingness to cooperate with an old foe all contributed to a massive jump in the president's popularity. At the end of the war, Bush was largely viewed as a strong military leader and the man who got the Soviets to work in America's best interest. The president, some supporters said, had ushered in a new world order, and with a seemingly impossible approval rating of 91% in some polls, George H.W. Bush spent much of 1991 as a heavy favorite to win re-election. Bush's popularity kept major Democrats like Tennessee Senator Al Gore and New York Governor Mario Cuomo from entering the race. However, not everyone believed Bush was unbeatable. At the peak of Bush's popularity, following the success of the Gulf War, former Republican President Richard Nixon predicted Bush would lose the election, saying a victory overseas wouldn't make up for a flagging economy back home. Nixon wasn't alone. A small group of Democrats saw the same crack in President Bush's armor. On October 3, 1991, in Little Rock, Arkansas, Governor Bill Clinton declared his candidacy with his wife, Hillary Rodham Clinton, standing by his side. For many voters, this was their first glimpse at the Clintons, fresh, new faces in the Democratic Party. But the Clintons had been around. Back in 1978, Bill Clinton had gained some notoriety as the youngest governor in America at the age of 32. 2 years later, he lost his bid for re-election, and most assumed the young man would fade from the political landscape. But in 1982, Clinton mounted another campaign and reclaimed the Arkansas governorship. The win in '82 garnered Clinton the nickname the Comeback Kid, and soon the Southern Democrat and Rhodes Scholar with the easygoing charm caught the eye of DNC leadership. In the 1988 presidential election, when Democratic frontrunner Gary Hart had been forced to withdraw from the primary over a salacious photo with actress Donna Rice, the DNC had asked Bill Clinton to enter the race. At the time, Clinton hadn't felt ready. But in late 1991, with 4 more years as governor under his belt, he believed it was time for him to step onto the national stage. In the 1988 general election, Democrats had watched as Republican political consultants like Lee Atwater and Roger Ailes systematically broke down Democratic nominee Michael Dukakis with a series of pointed attack ads and public character assassinations. In an attempt to avoid a similar outcome in the 1992 election, the Democrats turned to their own political consultants who could counter any such attacks should the Bush campaign try them again. In December of 1991, Bill Clinton hired political strategist James the Ragin' Cajun Carville to head up his campaign. Carville had a reputation as being smart, relentless, and a man who was willing to go to war with an opponent. Clinton and Carville had met in the summer of '91 and had hit it off almost instantly. They shared an easy rapport, and they even had a running game of trying to out-Southern each other by sharing stories of their respective childhoods in Arkansas and Louisiana. Carville believed that the first month of the campaign was about survival. Their main competition in the Democratic primary was Massachusetts Senator Paul Tsongas. Carville believed that if they could raise enough money and bolster Clinton's name recognition, they had a good chance of passing Tsongas early on in the race. Building campaign infrastructure and getting Bill Clinton in front of people was the main goal of December of '91. Meanwhile, Carville continued to develop his strategy for a potential general election showdown with President Bush. For Carville, the strategy was a simple one. If they got past Tsongas and nabbed the Democratic nomination, they would hammer the president relentlessly about his continued economic failures. To get his point across, Carville hung signs at Clinton headquarters. In big, bold letters, they read, "The economy, stupid." James Carville and former President Richard Nixon weren't the only ones who saw the economy as President Bush's Achilles heel. While a number of pundits and politicians claimed Bush was unbeatable after the American military victory over Iraq, evidence of a rapid decline in his popularity was obvious by the end of 1991. America had fallen into a recession, and unemployment had reached 8%. In the minds of many Americans, the president had failed to address a growing economic crisis. People across the country felt the sting of the recession, and suddenly Republican strongholds in the Midwest and on the West Coast seemed like they might actually be in play in the upcoming election. Despite these glaring issues on the home front, George Bush still preferred to focus on foreign policy. He had even stated publicly that when it came to domestic affairs, he had trouble laying out the vision thing, as he called it. This admission worried his supporters and became a recurring attack from the left. Democrats claimed, by his own admission, George Bush had no real plan to help struggling Americans. But unfortunately for Bush, these attacks weren't only coming from the left. One of the main reasons Bush had been put on the ticket as Ronald Reagan's running mate in the 1980 election was because he was seen as a moderate who could help assuage the fears some American voters had about Reagan's conservative politics. But a lot had changed in 12 years, and the conservative wing of the Republican Party had grown significantly. Conservatives had been integral in helping Bush win the GOP primary in 1988. In many ways, Bush's opponent in that primary, Kansas Senator Bob Dole, offered a more conservative agenda. But the right wing of the party had supported Bush because of his link to President Reagan, and because much of his '88 campaign focused on conservative economic policies. Bush had made a major campaign promise in 1988.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
But as president, Bush went back on that promise, and conservatives started to turn on him. The frustration of the conservative wing of the GOP came clearly into view when former Nixon speechwriter and fellow Republican Pat Buchanan decided to challenge George H.W. Bush in the 1992 primaries. While Buchanan's primary challenge posed no real threat, his candidacy was evidence of declining support for Bush within his own party. Meanwhile, Texas businessman Ross Perot watched all of this from the sidelines. He had far more money than the fledgling Buchanan campaign could ever muster, and he'd already gained national notoriety from his financial success and legendary stories about his exploits in Iran. At the end of 1991, the 91% approval rating George H.W. Bush had once enjoyed plummeted to as low as 29%. Ross Perot saw his opening. While he would hold off on making any official announcement, Perot took every opportunity to go on television and talk to the American people about all of the problems in the country he thought needed fixing, and how President Bush was not up to the task. In early 1992, George Bush's popularity continued to wane. With pressure coming from conservatives and a potential showdown with billionaire Ross Perot looming, Bush struggled to right the ship. But with Bush floundering and Perot waiting in the wings, Governor Bill Clinton's rapid ascent hit a major roadblock. Once again, the Democratic Party would find its frontrunner at the center of a sex scandal. Did you know you can skip ads and promos like these and listen to all episodes of American Elections Wicked Game without interruption by subscribing at IntoHistory.com? And not only will you be getting the whole series ad-free and bingeable, but you also get access to over a dozen more incredible history podcasts, also ad-free, like Her Half of History. Because even though Hillary Clinton may not have made history when she ran for president in 2016, there have always been women who seized power, spied for their country, created artistic masterpieces, even escaped slavery. Her Half of History is perfect for all those who sat in history class and wondered, what were the women doing all this time? Because the answer is a lot. Get Her Half of History, Wicked Game, and many others ad-free at IntoHistory.com. Subscribe now at IntoHistory.com. Tired of ads and promos like these? Want to skip ahead to newer elections? You can listen to all episodes of American Elections Wicked Game without interruption by subscribing at IntoHistory.com. But not only that, you also get access to over a dozen more incredible history podcasts, also all ad-free. That includes the American Revolution podcast, a deep and thorough investigation of the times, people, and politics behind America's fight for independence. Also, the battles, because we can't start a new American nation without guns. And the American Revolution podcast tells the story of the revolution from beginning to end, from its origins in the French and Indian War, through the war itself, and on to the founding of the United States. Get American Elections Wicked Game, the American Revolutions podcast, and many others ad-free with bonus content at IntoHistory.com. Subscribe now at IntoHistory.com. It's Saturday, February 15th, 1992, on the road between Manchester and Nashua, New Hampshire. Bill Clinton has just piled into a minivan with his wife, Hillary Rodham Clinton, his top campaign strategist, James Carville, and some close advisors. Tomorrow, CNN will host a debate that will give the Democratic candidates their last chance to spar before New Hampshire voters go to the polls on Tuesday, February 18th, for the first primary of the 1992 election. Bill Clinton is frustrated. There's no damn excuse, Jim. Tsongas and the others, they don't talk about anything. We should be doing better here. Governor, there's no one in this election better at detailing policy than you, but we can't get bogged down in minutia. It's not what voters respond to. I'm overprepared and I'm underprepared. Tsongas has disappeared for days. I guarantee you he's doing debate prep, focusing on minutia. In reality, Paul Tsongas has taken a break from the campaign to deal with a painful eye infection, but Clinton has convinced himself his opponent will come into the debate with hundreds of hours of preparation behind him. What's the objective in this debate, Jim? To win, Governor. Carville sips a beer he's brought along for the ride and gives a wide grin. The objective is to make it about something big. Every time you can make it about the big choices, the better it is for you. Should I be more aggressive? It's okay to be as aggressive as possible, but you've got to hit the big ideas. Being too aggressive is risky, especially right before the primary. I know it's risky, but shit, we're in a risky position. We're in a war now, and don't make no mistake about it. For a while, the only sounds are the minivan's wheels on the road, and Carville occasionally swigging his beer. Then Rodham Clinton brings up something everyone else has purposely been avoiding. You have to be ready for the question, Bill. What question? The question. The one that goes, if you can't keep your promise to your wife, how can we trust you to keep promises to us? Hillary Rodham Clinton doesn't deliver the line as a personal attack, or with any sense of hurt or anger. She speaks to her husband like a well-seasoned political advisor. Questions about Bill Clinton's faithfulness to his wife have become a major topic on the campaign trail, and she is smart enough to know that they will be front and center at the debate. Remember, Bernard Shaw is one of the moderators, Bill. Last time he hosted a debate, he asked Dukakis a hypothetical about his wife getting raped. You think he's going to shy away from this? A month earlier, former Arkansas state employee Jennifer Flowers alleged that she and Bill Clinton had engaged in a 12-year affair. The story had first run in a tabloid newspaper, The Star, but media outlets all over the country quickly picked it up. Even though Jennifer Flowers' claims hadn't been substantiated, Bill and Hillary Clinton had gone on 60 Minutes, directly following the broadcast of the Super Bowl, to address the situation. With millions of Americans watching, they had denied Jennifer Flowers' claims. Then, after openly discussing past problems in their marriage, Rodham Clinton had made what many considered the most memorable and most important statement of the night.
You know, I'm not sitting here as some little woman standing by my man like Tammy Wynette. I'm sitting here because I love him, and I respect him, and I honor what he's been through and what we've been through together. And you know, if that's not enough for people, then heck, don't vote for him.
Hillary Rodham Clinton's performance on 60 Minutes was widely credited with keeping Bill Clinton's campaign alive. However, the Jennifer Flowers story still hung over Clinton's head in New Hampshire. The topic did come up in the debate just as she had predicted it would. 2 days later, Paul Tsongas beat Bill Clinton in the New Hampshire primary by 8%. While it was a disappointing loss, the comeback kid couldn't be counted out. Almost immediately following New Hampshire, the Jennifer Flowers story would fade, and Clinton would start to run away with the Democratic primary. Some would credit the shift in public opinion to Clinton's inherent charm on TV, and others would say it was due to his wife's continued support. Many pundits, however, would come to believe the voting public had simply gotten burned out on scandal after having to wade through two major scandals in the 1988 contest, the Iran-Contra affair and the Gary Hart-Donna Rice scandal. Whatever the reason, it was clear the Jennifer Flowers story wouldn't stop the comeback kid. On February 20th, 1992, just 2 days after the New Hampshire primary, Ross Perot made an appearance on CNN's Larry King Live. It was no surprise to see Perot on any number of talk shows at the time. He'd made it a point to stay visible throughout the campaign season. Perot started this particular interview, as he started many of his TV appearances, with a message for what he called grassroots America.
We're the owners of this country. We don't act like the owners. We act like white rabbits that get programmed by messages coming out of Washington. We own this place.
Larry King followed up with a question that Perot had been asked many times over this past year.
Is there any scenario in which you would run for president? Can you give me a scenario in which you'd say, okay, I'm in?
If you're that serious, you, the people, are that serious, you register me in 50 states.
Perot's response came as a complete surprise to King and to many viewers at home. The media covered it as an official announcement that Perot would run. When his supporters lived up to his demand and registered him in all 50 states, Ross Perot officially began his campaign as an independent candidate, making the 1992 contest a three-way race. Grassroots Draft Perot factions sprung up all across the country to raise awareness of Perot's campaign. Soon, the wealthy businessman from Texas was being called a folk hero by Americans from all walks of life. His reputation as a man of action persisted, and in the spring of 1992, it seemed like he would have a real path to the White House. In May, he enjoyed higher favorability ratings than both President Bush and presumptive Democratic nominee Bill Clinton. Many started to consider Ross Perot the frontrunner. Then the summer arrived, and everything changed. In June, Perot appeared erratic at times in public. He avoided answering questions put to him, and he struggled to stay focused on any major policies. At a speech for the NAACP, he referred to his mainly black audience as "you people." After the backlash, Perot said he would no longer attend events that weren't populated with his own supporters. Behind the scenes, aides said Perot had become paranoid that former CIA agents connected to President Bush had infiltrated his campaign staff. Perot started demanding staffers take loyalty oaths. He also claimed GOP operatives were threatening to ruin his daughter's wedding and cause other problems for his family. On July 16, 1992, Perot went back on Larry King Live and said he would no longer seek the presidency. On that same day in New York City, Bill Clinton officially accepted the Democratic nomination for president. He chose Tennessee Senator Al Gore as his running mate. The DNC hoped that two Southern Democrats could widen the party's appeal in the South as the region had slipped into Republican control. They also hoped these baby boomers would usher in a new age of leadership by appealing both to their own generation, which now made up the largest voting bloc in the country, and the growing number of Gen X voters who were viewed by many as being apathetic about politics. The next month, on August 20th, 1992, George H.W. Bush accepted the Republican nomination at the party's convention held in Houston's Astrodome. Despite pressure from some party leadership to make a change, Bush stuck with Vice President Dan Quayle as his running mate. He hoped Quayle would appeal to the conservative base of the party and perhaps garner some of the younger voters Clinton was courting. With Ross Perot out of the race, Clinton and Bush could run more traditional campaigns. On the Democratic side, James Carville and Clinton Communications Director George Stephanopoulos urged their candidate to continue to attack Bush on the economy. They also sent him on a mission to secure the youth vote. Clinton showed up on MTV to talk about everything from his favorite fast food to how the country needed young people to rock the vote. When he played saxophone on the extremely popular Arsenio Hall show, Clinton became a hit with many of the young members of the home audience and their baby boomer parents who were watching along with them.
Did you ever think about playing professionally?
Yeah, and I liked it tonight. I like being on the other side of the posse.
Yeah.
Speaking of what your drummer said?
What?
He said if this music thing doesn't work out, you can always run for president.
Whether appearing on Arsenio or at small-town campaign events, Clinton wanted to show he and Al Gore were more in touch with the majority of Americans than George Bush. Clinton and Gore connected with parents of small children and young adults because they themselves had kids at home. Carville and Stephanopoulos' plans worked at every turn. As fall approached, Bill Clinton's popularity continued to grow, and Americans increasingly blamed President George H.W. Bush for their financial woes. As Clinton continued to gain ground, Bush failed to make much headway. Bush had never enjoyed campaigning, but this time he seemed even less enthusiastic. His own staff commented on how he often appeared wholly uninterested. In truth, the campaign lacked direction. The mastermind behind much of Bush's 1988 run, Lee Atwater, had died in early 1991 from an inoperable brain tumor. Atwater's absence was felt by everyone on the campaign trail. He had managed to make the '88 race all about Michael Dukakis's flaws and weaknesses, but this time around, the Bush camp couldn't seem to make an attack on Clinton's stick. And it wasn't for lack of desire. George H.W. Bush did not like Bill Clinton, at least not in 1992. On multiple occasions in private, Bush had referred to the Arkansas governor as sleazy. As a World War II veteran, Bush saw Clinton's apparent avoidance of the Vietnam War as an act of cowardice. He publicly called both Clinton and Gore bozos and even suggested his own dog, Millie, would make a better president than Bill Clinton. However, unlike in 1988, the character attacks didn't work. Part of that was simply because Bill Clinton was not Michael Dukakis. Whereas Dukakis had been viewed by many as being cold and distant on the campaign trail, Clinton possessed an easy speaking style and on-camera appeal that had garnered comparisons to Ronald Reagan. This went a long way in allowing Clinton to rise above the type of scandal that just 4 years earlier had ended Gary Hart's political career. Clinton also had his wife, Hillary Rodham Clinton, a skilled lawyer and a savvy campaigner in her own right, by his side. And then he had James Carville running his campaign. Dukakis' people had been caught unaware when the infamous Willie Horton ad aired in 1988. Carville would not make the same mistake. But the race was not coming down to just Clinton's strengths. George Bush was struggling to find his own narrative. He ended up campaigning heavily on family values, a topic that wasn't well defined and, according to polls, was only a high priority issue for 15% of Republican voters. With October on the horizon, Bush realized his presidency was in real jeopardy. He started to prepare in earnest for the upcoming debates. He hoped going one-on-one with Clinton on live television would be enough to show America that he was still the right choice. But as often the case in American politics, October would be full of surprises. As the 1992 election headed towards the finish line, Ross Perot would re-enter the race, and George Bush would once again be forced to fend off attacks from both sides. Then, just as the Democrats thought the White House was within their reach for the first time in 12 years, a secret dossier would surface and threaten to embroil Bill Clinton in a series of new scandals. Did you know you can skip ads and promos like these and listen to all episodes of American Elections Wicked Game without interruption by subscribing at intohistory.com? And not only will you be getting the whole series ad-free and bingeable, but you also get access to over a dozen more incredible history podcasts, also all ad-free, like Wild West Extravaganza, a journey back to the fascinating, tumultuous, and often violent world of the American Old West. From famous outlaws like Billy the Kid and Jesse James, to lawmen like Wyatt Earp and Wild Bill Hickok, to trailblazing pioneers and frontiersmen, Wild West Extravaganza tells the true stories of the real-life characters who shaped this iconic era. So saddle up and discover the true history of the American frontier, the good, the bad, and the ugly, ad-free at intohistory.com. If you're a careful Wicked Game listener, you know in the credits I mentioned my friend Professor Greg Jackson and his podcast, History That Doesn't Suck. It's a great show. But one way it can doesn't suck even more is when you listen to it without ads. You can listen to all episodes of American Elections Wicked Game, all episodes of History That Doesn't Suck, and all episodes of many more great history podcasts without interruption by subscribing at intohistory.com. History That Doesn't Suck is a deeply researched chronological survey of American history from a trained academic who also knows how to tell a story. Plus, in addition to ad-free listening to one of the best American history podcasts out there, you get scores of bonus episodes at intohistory.com. Subscribe now at intohistory.com. On October 1st, 1992, Ross Perot re-entered the presidential race with a bang. His campaign reportedly spent close to $35 million on marketing, and soon he was all over America's television sets. In response, Clinton strategist James Carville would call Perot's candidacy the single most expensive act of masturbation in the history of the world. The bulk of Perot's massive media buy went into a series of infomercials. In multiple half-hour and hour-long slots on major networks, Ross Perot appeared sitting behind his desk. With a pointer, graphs, and charts, he talked to the American people about his economic plans and went on the attack against his opponents. But the infomercials gained far more attention for Perot's unique performance style than his actual policies.
We will now bring you one of those 30-minute commercials entitled Chicken Feathers, Deep Voodoo, and the American Dream.
Now, before I start, I have to use my voodoo stick again. And it's not completely inappropriate because the first time as a boy I ever went to Arkansas, we went to the alligator farm. And this is a simulated alligator claw on a voodoo stick. So it reminds me of my first...
Despite Perot's ubiquitous appearances on TV, his newly relaunched campaign couldn't find the momentum it had early on in the race. An opinion piece in the New York Times stated, Perot's chances of winning are much less than when he quit in July. His only dim practical hope is to confuse and destabilize the contest. Beyond the infomercials, Perot made very little attempt to get in front of voters. Clay Mulford, who was general counsel to the Perot campaign, would say he wanted to do it just like he could go to the office every day, run for president, and go home and eat dinner. Not everyone thought campaigning was a simple 9 to 5. With 3 presidential debates scheduled for October, the Clinton camp refused to let Ross Perot's return distract them. During Perot's absence, Bill Clinton had surged in popularity by relentlessly hammering George Bush on the economy and by laying out a vision for his America, where the wealth gap would close and new technologies would offer opportunities for Generation X as more of them entered the workforce. The first of the 3 debates took place on October 11th at the Washington University Fieldhouse. While most believed all 3 candidates made a strong showing, the debate set up a pattern that would hold for the remainder of the campaign. While Clinton went after Bush on the economy, Perot called into question Bush's spending on foreign policy initiatives and the Gulf War. Suddenly, the war, which had once been Bush's strong suit, was now being used against him. The 1-2 punch combo from Clinton and Perot left Bush beleaguered. When the first debate came to a close, Bush walked off the stage as the Clinton and Perot families swarmed in and celebrated together. Ross Perot even made a point to take a picture with Bill and Hillary's 12-year-old daughter, Chelsea Clinton, who was hobbling on crutches due to a dance class injury. The second debate took place just a few days later, on October 15, 1992, at the Rollins Fieldhouse in Richmond, Virginia. The town hall format of the debate allowed Bill Clinton's casual, conversational style to shine, but a question George Bush took from an audience member became the main story of the night.
Yes, how has the national debt personally affected each of your lives? And if it hasn't, how can you honestly find a cure for the economic problems of the common people if you have no experience in what's ailing them?
It wasn't Bush's response that garnered headlines. While answering the question about Americans experiencing financial strain, the president paused and glanced at his watch. Members of the media and many viewers at home took Bush's action as a sign that he was bored and uninterested in the concerns of everyday people. Some Bush supporters argued that he was simply trying to keep track of how much time he had left for his answer, but Bush himself put that argument to rest. When PBS news anchor Jim Lehrer asked him about the moment, the president implied he didn't want to be at the debate. "Was I glad the damn thing was over?" "Yeah," Bush said. By the time the third debate took place just 4 days later on October 19th, it seemed like it might be too late for the president to bounce back. After 3 solid debate performances, the Clinton team felt confident going into the final weeks of the campaign. Carville and Stephanopoulos started to get downright giddy as internal numbers showed them winning back significant percentages of voters known as the Reagan Democrats. After voting for Ronald Reagan in 80 and 84, many of them had stuck with Reagan's VP, George Bush, in 88. That would not be the case this time around. At the end of October, Clinton, his camp, and the DNC believed that there was nothing that could stop the Democrats from finally taking back the White House. But at the last minute, another potential scandal would threaten to derail the campaign and put the Democrats' hopes in jeopardy. It's Monday, November 2nd, 1992, at Ross Perot's Chicago campaign offices. It's the day before the presidential election. Steve Denari, the director of Perot's Illinois campaign office, goes over his notes for one of the last radio appearances of the campaign. The Perot team knows they have no chance of winning, but Denari wants to highlight all of the positives his candidate brought to the race. A fellow member of Perot's Illinois leadership enters the room and drops a 3-inch thick file folder on Denari's desk. "You're going to want to see this, Steve." Denari scans through the mountain of papers as best he can, trying to get a better idea of what he's looking at. "Where did you get this?" "It came anonymously." "Well, probably from the Bush campaign." "Maybe. But I thought you might want to bring it up when you do Dumont's show later." "There's no way I can read all this or verify it before I go on the radio. Anyone could have forged this. You, me, anyone." But then Denari picks up the phone. "What are you doing?" "I'm calling the Clinton campaign." Denari reaches Clinton headquarters and says he wants to speak to someone confidentially. Communications Director George Stephanopoulos takes the call. "George, Steve Denari. I've got a telephone book's worth of pages making accusations about your candidate, and I'm about to go on the radio here in Chicago."
Read it to me, Steve.
The first part is a fact with names and addresses of women Bill Clinton supposedly had an affair with.
Names and addresses? Well, I can send you a fax with names and addresses of women you've had an affair with. It wouldn't make it true.
Yeah, but that's not all, George. There are claims in here that Bill Clinton is the father of an illegitimate black child named Danny Williams.
Well, that's complete bullshit. If you go on the radio and say Bill Clinton is the father of an illegitimate black child, you'll be laughed at. People will think you're crazy. Look, if you do this, nobody will believe you. All they'll think is you're scummy. I wouldn't do it, Steve.
Steve Denari hangs up the phone. He stares at the folder. Would the information be enough to ruin Clinton at the last minute and sway the election for Bush? He doesn't know, but he's positive he won't be the one to put it out to the public. Steve Denari tosses the dossier into a fireplace and watches it burn. It has never been confirmed that the information sent to Steve Denari came from the Bush campaign. George Stephanopoulos' side of the phone call would be memorialized in The War Room, a 1993 documentary about the Clinton campaign. As for Denari, he would suggest if Stephanopoulos had said no comment or blown him off, he might have given more credence to the dossier. But Stephanopoulos' strong response was enough to convince him he wanted no part in whatever political games were being played. With the last-minute scandal averted, the Clinton campaign went into Election Day extremely confident the American people would vote for change. And on November 3, 1992, Bill Clinton was elected the 42nd President of the United States. He became the first baby boomer ever to hold the office. Clinton won 370 electoral votes and 42.3% of the popular vote. It was by no means a mandate, but it was certainly more than George H.W. Bush's 37%. While Ross Perot didn't win any states in the Electoral College, he received roughly 19% of the popular vote, the best showing by a third-party candidate since Teddy Roosevelt in 1912. Many in the Bush camp would go on to blame Perot for Bush's loss. But according to the Almanac of American Politics 1994, exit polls showed that the second-choice candidates of Perot voters were split evenly between Bush and Clinton. The Almanac therefore concludes that, had Mr. Perot not been in the race, Mr. Clinton still would have won. The bigger concern among some in the GOP was that Bill Clinton won the state of California, a Republican stronghold since the 50s. Clinton also dominated among voters 18 to 24 and won sizably among single parents, who made up a rapidly growing section of the population. Both parties knew the electoral map was changing, and they knew they would need to adapt before the next election. Without a strong mandate, Bill Clinton's first term as president would get off to a rocky start. And for Clinton, things would take a turn for the worse when Republicans gained control of both the House and Senate in the 1994 midterms. By 1995, many in the media would write Bill Clinton off as a one-term president. But to stay on top in the 1996 contest, the comeback kid would lean on a booming economy, shifting demographics, and his good old-fashioned Southern charm. This is episode 52 of American Elections Wicked Game, 1992, The Baby Boomer and the Independent. On the next episode, the election of 1996. Bill Clinton bounces back from early problems in his presidency and looks to become the first two-term Democratic president since FDR. To stop him, Republicans turn to Senator Bob Dole and try to conjure images of a glorious American past that only they can bring back. But Dole won't be the Democrats' biggest problem. With re-election on the line, Bill and Hillary Clinton will suddenly find themselves at the center of several scandals. Icebergs, jagged rocks and rocky straits, mutinies, misfortune, and broadside battles. There are more tales of the sea than survivors to tell them, but the podcast Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs is doing a good job, and you can listen to all episodes of that podcast plus many others, including American Elections Wicked Game, without interruption by subscribing at intohistory.com. Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs is one of my favorites from last year, a podcast about the greatest mishaps, misfortune, and misadventures of the sea. You'll hear stories of corruption, greed, bad intentions, and just plain horrible decision-making that resulted in some of the worst maritime disasters from all over the world. And some of these are more recent than you think. All episodes are ad-free, including bonus content and more at intohistory.com. Subscribe now at intohistory.com. This episode contains reenactments and dramatized details, and while in most cases we can't know exactly what was said, all our dramatizations are based on historical research. American Elections Wicked Game is an Airship production, hosted, edited, and executive produced by me, Lindsey Graham. Audio editing by Molly Bach. Sound design by Derek Behrens. Music by Lindsey Graham. Co-executive produced by Stephen Walters in association with Ritual Productions. Written and researched by Michael Federico. Fact-checking by Greg Jackson and C.L. Salazar from the podcast History That Doesn't Suck.
According to some, Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole were two of the most prolific serial killers America's ever seen. But not everyone agrees with that assessment, and for good reason. Because although Lucas and Toole were killers, they were also men who'd happily lie to get what they want. And in the 1980s, they lied to a lot of people. Hi, I'm Jeremy Schwartz, host of the new true crime history podcast, American Criminal. We take you inside the minds of some of our most notorious felons and outlaws, exploring the dark side to the American dream. In our latest season, how two men conned an entire country and their role in the horrific crime that changed America forever. Listen to American Criminal, Serial Killers, Serial Liars, wherever you get your podcasts. Or to get early ad-free access to the entire season first, plus hundreds of other ad-free history podcast episodes, subscribe at intohistory.com.